Good morning to Mrs. Ng and my fellow classmates. I am Wei En, and together with me are Jennifer, Shankari, Xingyu, and Chen Xuan. Today, we will be presenting our solution on Task 1. The problem is that there is no specific information given that is related to the land that could be used and for the time that is taken for growth of trees, making interpretations very difficult. To solve this, we need to use data adapted from different websites and make some assumptions to have an easy interpretation using two methods. This is the table of contents for our presentation today. First and foremost, we have to understand the problem, devise a plan, carry out the plan, look back, reflect, and have a Q&A session where we will answer your queries. Now, we'll be looking at understanding the problem. So what is the information given to us? Well, there's information about what reforestation is, the factors that contribute towards the issue of deforestation, and the comparison of the different factors of deforestation. Now, let's look at the information that is required to accomplish the task. Firstly, is the amount of trees needed to produce a year worth of newspaper, and it is estimated to be 380,622. And the land required to plant the trees to produce the newspapers is 475.7775 hectares, and the time required is estimated to be 25 years. And the newspaper brand that we'll be focusing on today is Straits Time, and the average page in the brand's newspaper is 20, and the size of paper would be A2 size. So the amount of paper used per newspaper, which leads to the total paper used per year, and the rate of publishment will be found out throughout this presentation. And the newspaper published for every release of a version, it will be treated as same version throughout the year, and the thickness of the newspaper is 0.1 mm. And before we go into the problem, we will need to understand the process of making newspapers, which starts off by cutting and embarking the tree. Then, wood pieces are boiled with water and added with some chemicals, followed by printing and rolling.
Now, we have made some assumptions in order to solve our problem. Firstly, for the defects, we assume there is no defects of the trees. Secondly, we estimated that the newspaper used yearly is to be 869,000. Thirdly, for the rate of growth of trees, we assume that all trees are to be grown at the same rate throughout the years. Next, for the size of newspaper, we are focusing on the A2 size. Last but not least, for the trees logged, we assume that 100% of them are pine trees since it is the most common tree logged. Moving on, we also assume that for the elements of newspaper, 70% is recycled paper and 30% is pure paper. Secondly, for the wastage produced, 95% of them remains as the newspaper, while 5% is checked and cut off as border. Thirdly, for the size of a piece of newspaper, we assume that one page is A3 size and one piece is A2 size. For the duration to grow a tree, we estimated to be 25 years to grow to 15 meters of height. Last but not least, for the shape of the log, we assume it to be a perfect cylindrical shape. Importantly, we assume that the newspaper was 70% recycled and the remaining 30% of it is pure paper. We will be only focusing on the 30% of pure paper. Therefore, the final answer of land needed is only accounting to this 30%. Our mission statement is to be able to estimate the area of land required in hectares and the time required for the trees to grow back in years, which is required to produce a year's circulation of a major newspaper in Singapore. Now let's look at how we devised and carried out a plan. Our plan is to use the data to calculate the land that has to be used and the amount of time needed to grow the trees. There are two methods that we have used to do the calculations, and they are calculations by volume and calculations by weight. Let's look at the first method of solving this problem, which is by the calculation of volume.
We use decimals to plot a graph showing the relationship between the tree height in meters and the stem radius in centimeter. Based on the graph shown on the left, it can be assumed that the growth rate of a pine tree is uniform, where 1.37 meters is the initial height of the tree. And after some calculation, you can find out that the growth rate of the plant is 2.79 times versus the stem's radius. Therefore, we can conclude that as the height of the tree increases, the radius of the stem will also increase. We use 50 meters as the height of all the trees, as research has shown that a tree has to grow to an optimal height of 15 meters for it to be suitable for logging. So how do we solve by the calculation of volume? Firstly, we find the volume of each piece of paper in a newspaper, consisting of 4 pages. This can be done by multiplying the length, breadth, and width of the paper, which will be 42 cm times 59.4 cm times 0.01 cm equals to 24.948 cm cubed. Next, to find the total volume of an entire newspaper, multiply the volume of each piece of paper by the amount of paper in a newspaper. Assuming there's an average of 5 pieces of paper in each newspaper, 5 times 24.948 cm cubed will be equals to 124.74 cm cubed. Now to account for the paper wasted in the process of manufacturing the paper and the newspaper, add 5% of the volume to the original volume, which will be 124.74 centimeter cubes times 100% plus 5% in a bracket, which equals to 130.977 cm cubed. Since the paper composition of the newspaper is partly pure paper and recycled paper, assume the pure paper is 30%, and only find the pure paper that is used to create the paper of the newspaper. The equation will be 130.977 cm cubed times 30% equals to 39.2931 cm cubed. Using the data from the graph provided by Straits Times themselves, 41% of the people who read news reads physical newspaper, and the estimated total reader of newspaper, whether digital or physical, is around 1.9 million. Therefore, to find the total amount of physical newspaper readers, you multiply 1,900,000 by 41%, which will equate to 779,000. Assuming that Straits Times prints more than 779,000 newspaper every time they publish a new one, and assuming the 779,000 are the normal edition newspaper published daily, you round off 779,000 to the nearest 100,000, making it 800,000. To find the total amount of normal Straits Times newspaper printed every day for a year, multiply the total number of days in a year by the amount of newspaper printed daily, which will be 365 times 800,000, which will equate to 292 million. Now, find the total volume of pure paper used in a year worth of daily publishing of the newspaper. The equation will be 292 million times 39.2931 cm cubed, which will equate to 11,473,585,200 cm cubed. To find the radius of the raw wood log that is used to make the paper, we need to remove the bark from the tree log. Therefore, take the average radius of a pine tree's trunk, rounding off to the nearest whole number, and subtract the length of the pine tree bark that is in the radius of a pine tree log, which is also rounded off to the nearest whole number. The equation will be 53 cm minus 3 cm equals to 50 cm. Assuming a raw wood log is a perfect cylinder, and estimating each log's length to be 5 meter, calculate the volume of each of the entire raw wood log. The equation will be pi times 50 cm square times 5 equals to 39,270 cm cubed, rounded off to the nearest whole number. Assuming all pine trees are 50 meters in height, each pine tree will consist of 3 logs of raw wood. So, find the total volume of raw wood in a 50 meter tall pine tree, which will be 3 times 39,270 cm cubed equals to 117,810 cm cubed. And last, assuming that raw wood is 100% pure, making the ratio of the conversion of raw wood to pure paper 1 to 1, divide the total volume of the pure paper used in a year worth of production of daily publishing of the newspaper by the volume of the raw wood in a single 50 meter tall pine tree, you will find the total amount of trees required to produce the total volume of pure paper rounded off to the nearest whole number. The equation will be 11,473,585,200 cm cubed divided by 117,810 cm cubed, which will equate to 7,391. Rounded up to the nearest whole, we can find the total amount of land needed to grow all the pine trees. Assuming a hectare can grow 800 trees, leaving the answer in hectare. The equation will be 97,391 divided by 800 equals to 121.73875 hectares. According to the data in the source, pine trees grow about 2 feet per year. Converting 50 meter to feet will be 15 times 3.218 equals to 49.215 feet. And to find the total year needed for a pine tree to grow to 50 meters or 49.21 feet, divide 49.21 by 2 feet. The equation will be 49.215 divided by 2 equals to 24.6075 years, which rounded off will be 25 years. Now, let's look at the second method used to solve by the calculation of weight.
We used Canva to plot a dot graph showing the relationship between the amount of trees and the area of land needed. This graph shows that as more newspaper is produced by the company, there is a need to have more land to grow more trees. Another interpretation is that different species of trees produces different amount of newspaper. And lastly, different amount of land is needed to grow the trees. So how do we solve it? By using the second method. Firstly, we find roughly how many trees is needed for a year worth of newspapers. Based on data, we know that 1 ton of newspaper need 12 trees. And 1 ton of newspaper consists of 200,000 pages, which is equivalent to 10,000 newspapers. So, the total amount of newspapers divided by how many newspapers are there in a ton to find the total ton of newspapers produced yearly, which is 869,000 times 365, which gives 317,185,000, which when divided by 10,000 will give you 31,718.5. Next, we need to use total ton multiplied by the number of trees needed per ton to find the total amount of trees needed per year roughly, which is 31,718.5 times 12, which gives 380,622. Next, we need to find roughly the land required for this amount of pine trees to grow. To do that, we need to find how many pine trees can grow per hectare. So we have to assume that 800 trees per hectare. Next, we need to find the total land area to grow 380,622 trees. So we take 380,622 divided by 800, which gives you 475.7775 hectares. Next, we need to find the time needed to grow the amount of trees needed for the pure paper. To do that, we need to find how long in years it takes to grow one tree, which is 25 years. This is because we want all the log to be at least 15 meters of height in average. Next, we need to find the total amount of years to grow 380,622 trees. 1 times 25 equals to 25. It's because the trees can be planted at the same time. So we found out that 475.775 hectares of land is needed to grow back the trees to produce a year worth of newspapers. And we also found out that it takes 25 years to grow the trees. Now let's look backwards at what we have done.
So which plan did we choose? We chose method 2, which is solved by calculating the weight. There were lesser assumptions made for this method. One example is, we could neglect the shape of the logs as we are only looking at the weight. Thus, the data that is recovered will be more reliable and accurate. All the trees grown are pine trees and could not be of any other species. Some constraints we faced are not being able to collect data such as the exact amount of trees needed to make one set of newspaper, and there were also many data that couldn't be found on Google. Therefore, not being able to give accurate numbers and data to represent our solution properly, as we had to estimate some of it. The duration of growth of trees is also dependent on the climate and season of the year. We cannot guarantee that in a hectare, only 800 trees are planted. There is no data that can guarantee that all the paper that was made is produced from 100% pine tree. How can our modeling strategy be extended to related problems? Our modeling strategy can be used to show it to the public about how precious our papers are and also appreciate the presence of trees, since they will be able to deduce the amount of trees chopped off to make a year's worth of newspaper, and also the time and land needed for the tree to grow back if they're chopped. They will be more appreciative of the natural presence and not waste this precious natural resource. This can also allow our modeling strategy to attract and educate the public on environmental issues and link back to our daily activities that might lead to this issue, and in this case, reforestation. Here are our reflections from this group project. For me, through this project, I was able to understand the importance of being on task and working well with one another.
From this project, I had a chance to inculcate values such as empathy, teamwork, resilience, and perseverance. I also learned how to apply mathematical concepts into real-life applications. I feel this really motivated me to think outside of the box and use what I have learned in the classroom to solve issues that can be of great concern to the society. This also helped me to hone my leadership and time management skills as I had to take initiatives in certain things of the project and also manage my time wisely while working on the project.
I'm Wei En, and what I've learned throughout this whole project is the importance of time management. Why did I say so is because our group in day 1 spent too many hours on discussion of whether the assumption is appropriate, and it leads to us not having to answer the questions. And not only that, we have to use our own free time after school to work on the Google document so that we can then work on the slides the next day without rush. Therefore, I believe that having a good time management is very important in group projects.
Through this project, I've learned that communication within a team is important since we get to voice out our opinions and make meaningful discussions. We also get to learn from one another. I've also learned the value of teamwork since it is important that everyone work together as a team to complete tasks more efficiently.
I'm able to synergize with my group mates and learn the importance of cooperation.
These are the credits and the websites that we used for our presentation. And here are some pictures of us being hard at work. Now we will have the Q&A session where you can inquire any doubts or questions you have.